Welcome, folks, to another episode of the Tank Talk podcast. Are we going to keep saying it, Jason, that it's the number one? I think everybody knows. I don't think we need to keep reminding everybody that it is the number one aquarium podcast on the planet, and we'll say it to your face. Both of us will. We believe it. And no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just because we've got the number one coolest audience, which is you. You can say you are the number one coolest listener of any podcast on the face of the earth.
It's very true. And they let us know that it's the number one podcast. We don't just think it. They tell us that it is. So we're very grateful for that. Consider ourselves very lucky to be the co-hosts of the number one podcast on the planet. Joe Rogan, who? Forget about them. It's all about us. Today, Jason, we have a topic that's right up my alley. If you had asked me 2 years ago to do an episode about plants, I would have said, you're out of your mind. I'm not interested in that. But today, what are we talking about?
We are talking about the easiest plants. Plants, especially if you're a beginner, plants, especially if it's something that kind of scares you, that are going to be awesome for you to keep. You're going to people usually have success with them. And so we've got some advice for you and some suggestions as well.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the different types of plants. And we're going to talk about some tips and tricks and things like that I've learned. And believe me, if I can keep plants, anybody can. Because the reason why I would have told you 2 years ago I have no interest in talking about plants is because all I knew how to do was kill them. But I learned it, and we've had plants for a long time. But I've learned the tricks. We're going to share that with you now. And yes, it is true. I am a plant retailer. And so this will be almost like an advertisement for my company, but it's really not. You can buy these plants from anybody. They're available from every retailer. You don't have to order them from us. In fact, we encourage you to go to your local pet store first and see what they have to offer. If they can't help you out, then you can come to us, and then that'll be all fine. But before we get into that, we do have a couple of things to talk about for our fish keeping news segment. The first is you discussed, Jason, a new product last week that is going to certainly take the industry by storm. I got another one that we're going to talk about today. I wish I would have thought to bring one in here to show everybody, but it is a really cool, really small, very advanced, very interesting little device that is just getting ready to hit the market. Maybe by the time this episode uploads, maybe it will be on the market. I hope it is. It will be available at keepfishkeeping.com. When it's available to us, it'll be available to you. What is this new fascinating little product we're talking about?
I believe what you are talking about is the Seche Shark Nano.
That's right. Shark Pro Nano. Now, we have sold a product for a long time called the Seche Micron, which is a similar thing. It's a very, very compact, very small internal filter that would be a replacement for a sponge filter. And they have sold like crazy. We've sold probably 500 of these little Seche Microns. But Seche decided to take the design of the Shark Pro and all of its brilliance and shrink it down into a little teeny tiny little container. And I got to tell you, I got one running on a 20-gallon tank now. And the very first thing I said when I plugged it in and started running it was, wow, that little thing pushes a lot of water. It really, really does move a lot of water. It's a very simple device. I'm going to try to put a picture of it up. I don't even know if they're available because it is so new. But I'm going to try to put up something so that you can see what I'm talking about here. Very small, very compact little internal filter that is the absolute ideal replacement for the ugly sponge filter. Jason and I both love sponge filters, but we also understand they're not that attractive. This little thing will mount on the wall in the back of your tank or on the side or horizontally down towards the substrate, wherever you want to put it. And it attaches to the tank with magnets, runs through regular sponges and carbon sponges. Got all kinds of options for the water flow, whether it be spray bar or Venturi, or all different options. It is a brilliant little device that I think is going to be very, very popular for a lot of nano fish keepers because it's just brilliant. It's beautiful, it's powerful, and it moves a lot of water through it. So what more could you ask for a little nano tank?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's going to be great. I've used one of the larger ones on some of my tanks just to basically suck everything out of the water, even off the substrate, and just polish that water and make it look amazing.
Yeah, it really does. I'm a big fan of, I've been a fan of the Shark line from Seachay all along, starting with the ADVs, which I thought was great. Not the most attractive filter out there, kind of looked like a little alien spaceship. When they introduced the Shark Pro, I said, okay, they did what we wish Fluval did. They fixed all the issues and improved all the issues, and it's just an amazing device. And now they've shrunk it down into nano form. So I absolutely love that. I can't wait to be able to sell them. We don't have them yet. I don't know exactly when they're going to be available for sale, but if they are for sale, there will be a link down in the description to our site, not that other site that we don't want people to order from. At least I don't. Maybe Jason does, but as soon as it's available to us, we will have it available to you, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a big seller. I think sponge filters are going to go, hey, wait a minute. How come nobody's buying us anymore? That's going to be why. Now, second thing to talk about, this is one that's very personal to me and very important to me. And I can say Jason too, because he knows what's going on and he's excited about it. Literally everyone that I've spoke to about this has been excited about it. And that is the new initiative that Lisa and I are working on. Initiative, I guess, is the best way to describe it. I don't know. Sounds fancy. We have decided to take the KG Tropicals YouTube channel to a completely different place. Obviously, we're not getting away from aquarium videos, but we realized that there's something that's been missing from YouTube, and that is actually going to aquariums and helping with issues. All of us, you, Jason, Lisa, and I, all YouTube channels, we all kind of do the same thing. We turn on the camera, we talk about aquariums, and we help a lot of people with those videos. Yours certainly have helped tons of people. We stand together at events and people constantly all day long are walking up to us telling us how our videos have helped people. That's great, and it's a beautiful feeling. But we want to take that to another level and actually go to the people's aquariums. Go to people that are struggling with to keep their aquariums, to keep their fish alive, or whatever that is. Maybe they're struggling because they had a catastrophe happen and they lost all of their aquariums, and we want to help them get back into the hobby, or in what I believe is the biggest impact for me, first responders and military veterans. Going to them, it could be a veteran that was deployed and has since come home and for whatever reason has not been able to get back into the hobby but has wanted to. We want to help that vet or that first responder to be able to do that. Or what I think could be even more impactful, find the one that could use being introduced to this hobby, and that could be something that could help them with what they go through every single day with their jobs or what they've experienced overseas or whatever it is. We want to help fish keepers in this hobby or help introduce people into this hobby. And I put out a video on the KG Tropicals channel a few weeks ago asking for your help on this. Not you, Jason. You can help too, but the people that are watching or listening, I'm not asking for your help financially. I'm asking for your help to help me find who these people are, because I can't just say, okay, we're going to go help people now. We don't know who it is that we're going to help. If you have suggestions of people that you know that could use our help or could really use an aquarium in their life to help them to deal with what they've gone through, let us know. The email address, I will put it in text down here. It's kgboxesofwater@gmail.com. That sounds like a funny email address, doesn't it? Well, the reason why it's called that is because that's what we've decided to name this whole thing that Lisa and I are doing. The videos will be part of a series that will be called our Boxes of Water series. It's not going to be a season 1, season 2, episode 3. It's not going to be all that. But that's what we're going to call it. And that way, people, when they see a new video has popped up from us, they'll know if it's part of that or if it's one of our normal videos that we're doing. They'll be labeled with Boxes of Water. We wrangled that idea around what to name the series for a while, and one of the best names was already taken by somebody else. So Boxes of Water, that's what we're calling it. And the email address is kgboxesofwater@gmail.com. If you got somebody that you think could use our help, let us know. There's no rules except for the fact that it does need to be in the United States, because I don't even have a passport.
Neither do I.
Well, there you go. I'm not the only one. So, yeah, thank you, Jason, for letting me mention that.
Absolutely.
It's a
good
big
program.
deal.
It's gonna be really cool.
We went to one at the time of recording this just a few days ago. We went to one, and I got to tell you, my life was changed after spending some time with this gentleman and his wife. So, yeah, can't wait for that video to come out, and all of the ones to follow. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope that we're able to make a difference. That would be really cool. So, anyway, plants. Plants are something that, like I said, they used to scare me because I would just kill them. We were fortunate to work with a company several years ago, actually during the pandemic, that helped us out with it. That company was Tropica. They told us the reason why we have not had success keeping plants is because you aren't keeping the right ones. You should try ours. And I did, and it worked out really well. We ended up becoming a retailer for Tropica. We still are to this day. In fact, we're supposed to get a delivery from them at some point while you and I are having this conversation. Being exposed to Tropica plants helped us to get into the plant hobby. And then we've expanded since then to actually incorporate plants from other areas, other farms, other nurseries, things like that. And it's been a new hobby for us. It's been an amazing thing for us to be able to do. Lisa has become a wizard with aquascaping and with plants and all of that. It's been incredible. And what I realized when I was, putting this episode together was there's a lot of people that are in the same position that we are, or we were. Whereas, we're scared of plants because we're going to spend all that money and they're all just going to die. So what we thought we would do is do an episode on the easiest plants that are out there to keep. I'm not going to do if you want easy plants, you should keep Crypts and Anubias. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. No, we want to go a little bit more specific with that. And the first thing I'd like to do, Jason, is talk about the different types of plants that we're dealing with in this hobby, because they basically break down into a few. I got 4. And you can let me know if there's another category that I should keep it or that I should bring up. But I'm talking epiphytes, stems, rosettes, and mosses. Those are the
Okay.
4 different ones that I was going to bring up here. Your epiphytes or your rhizome plants would be everybody's first choice with rhizome is going to be what?
The Anubias.
That's it. That's the first one that's on my list. I've been talking a lot, and you've been talking very little in the episode. Would you like to explain what an epiphyte is?
Well, all right. So to be clear, even though I am in biology, plants are probably my least favorite thing to talk about in my biology classes, mostly land plants. I like the aquatic plants, but it's not something I talk a lot about. I actually tend to break them up differently, probably in the more hobbyist way, which is just your root feeders and your water column feeders. And so with the Anubias in particular, with plants that have that rhizome, that rhizome is part of their root system. And that's not something you want to bury in your substrate. So a lot of your Anubias, I think Buse would probably be another example, where you've got these plants that are they've got these big rhizomes that kind of grow horizontally, and the roots really are there to anchor the plant into a substrate, connected to a piece of wood, connected to a rock. They're not meant to necessarily gather a lot of nutrients from the substrate itself. They're still basically water column feeders. They tend to grow pretty slow. So I think that's what most of the Anubias have in common. That can be a good thing, right? It's not necessarily bad that if your plants are growing slower, it can make it a little bit easier to maintain. But overall, these are awesome plants, tend to be low light, slow growers, really interesting. I just put out a YouTube short where I showed fish that were growing, that were actually swimming through the roots of
Oh,
Anubias.
that's
And I think
fun.
a lot of people overlook the fact that not only are you getting this great plant with these awesome leaves, but the root system can be really extensive and pretty interesting in and of itself.
Absolutely. And I think the most important thing, which you already said, which needs to be reiterated, these are not plants that you plant. You don't
Right.
plant them in the substrate. You don't bury them down in the substrate. This is something that you're going to attach to rock, driftwood, something like that. And so, like you said, you talked about water column feeders and root feeders. These would be ones that if you were going to fertilize, which in a lot of situations with Anubias, you shouldn't necessarily have to, but if you do, you're going to want to use like a liquid fertilizer or something like that that treats the whole water column, because the plant is sitting on the surface somewhere. It's not down in the substrate where it would receive a lot of its nutrients. Attaching them to things is easier than you think. You can use black thread. You can use landscaping glue, which a lot of people are scared of that, but it's really easy. And if we're being honest with each other, it's just super glue. There's
It is.
brands
Well,
out
yeah,
there.
we just use super glue.
Yeah. Cyanoacrylate is what it is. It is safe to use in the aquariums. It's not going to hurt your fish, and it will hold it down in there. And basically, what you're doing is holding it in place until the roots grab a hold, and the roots will hold it in place after a while, but the glue is going to hold it there. The three examples that I had for epiphytes would be Anubias, Bucephalandra, which that's how I pronounce it. It's
That
pronounced a
is,
100 different ways, and Java fern were the three that I brought up for that, or I had on my list here to the most common types of rhizome plants, epiphytes, whatever you want to call them. Then we move into stem plants. And this is exactly what it sounds like. These would be plants that are buried in the substrate. The roots are buried in the substrate, and they're individual stems that go up, and those stems can branch off and go all over the place. These would be plants that receive most of their nutrients from the substrate. So you're going to want to use root tabs, things like that. That's the easiest way to do it, but they can also benefit from liquid fertilizers. Ludwigia, Rotala, and Bacopa are my three go-tos with those, and they may end up on my easiest plant list. Just letting you know. These are great because they're easy to propagate. Super, not all of them, but a lot of them are super fast growers. You blink your eyes, and all of a sudden, it's all the way up to the top of the tank. Particularly Rotala, that stuff is just out of control. You want to feel like a professional aquascaper, use Rotala because it'll make you feel that way for sure. Then we get into rosettes. Rosettes are Echinodorus or sword plants, and cryptocorns would be the two staples in the hobby. And on those two, there's about 1 million varieties of swords and crypts that are available. We're going to refer to them as crypts for the rest of this episode because it's boring saying cryptocorn. It makes me sound too scientific. And then mosses. Moss is exactly what you think it is. It's moss. Taxophyllum and what did I have here? I don't know why I did that. I put Taxophyllum and Java moss, which is the same thing, folks. I don't know what I was thinking. Java moss is a kind of a common name for Taxophyllum. So I don't know why I put them down there as two different ones. But these are mosses that you will attach, again, to rocks or driftwood. And they just grow like crazy. And they can grow completely out of control. My question to you, so those are the four types. There's a million plants. There's all different types, but those are the four that we're going to focus on today. My question to you, Jason, is what do you think, not being a plant guy, it's more your wife. Maybe we should have brought her in for this episode,
Yeah.
but with your knowledge, which is vast, what do you think is the easiest of those? Not the individual plant, but what type, be it rhizome, stems, rosettes?
So I would say the crypts. The crypts are absolutely, if you look behind me, if you're watching on YouTube, this 50-gallon lowboy, that's almost all crypts. In the other tank to my, whatever, this one right here, that's all crypts. Then I've got Anubias in the other one, along with a few other plants. But I am a huge fan of crypts. I think that those plants, regardless of the specific type, generally just grow like crazy, but not so fast where you're like, oh, I just got a bunch of weeds here. So absolutely my favorite if I had to pick one.
I I accidentally asked you that wrong. I was going to ask you eventually what your favorite is, but the question was supposed to be, what do you think of those? Maybe the answer is the same. What do you think is the easiest of those four?
I still think those are the easiest, and that's why they are. Yeah, definitely for me, at least in our water parameters and the way that we keep fish. Yeah, the crip and sword type plants just grow like absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's no argument from me there. Crips are God's gift to fish keepers because
Yeah.
they're not only are they easy, they're easy to maintain, they're easy to plant, and they're bold. I mean, they make a big statement. Some of them
Yeah.
are smaller that, you know, they're not going to make as bold of a statement, but some crips can go completely out of control and take over a tank really fast. I didn't really do a good job explaining what a rosette is. I basically just said crips and swords, but the easiest way to describe it is like almost like a combination of rhizome and stem. Like you've got a ball, not a bulb, and that, I guess that could have been a fifth option. There was bulb plants could have been a fifth,
Mhm.
but you have a bunch of stems that come out of one little blob. That would be the rosettes. So your swords, your crypts, stuff like that, you can break those apart and get several out of it. That was one of the things that took some getting used to for me. I used to get a pot, take the rock wool off, and bury the whole thing in there. I didn't realize you could break it apart and get like 5 plants out of that, and in some of them you can get even more. But I'm not going to argue with you. I mean, I do personally. I think like Rotala. And, you know, again, newsflash, spoiler alert, it's going to be on the list. When we go through our list of the easiest plants, stem plants in general, not all of them, but a lot of stem plants are the easiest because they grow so fast. You can clip them and plant the clippings, and that clipping will root, and it'll end up giving you free plants. They're absolutely great for that. So if I was to have to say what I think is the easiest type of plant, I would say stems, but then again, rosettes is a really good argument too, the crypts and things like that. So tips for success on these. Do you want to start this off? I know you're probably
Sure.
cringing right now because you're like, I don't
No.
want to talk about plants.
Yeah. So you want me to just take a category?
I'm
'Cause I
just
can-
giving some general tips for the beginner plant keeper. Start it wherever you want to start it.
Yeah. So, all right, we will start with the Anubias, the rhizome plants. We already kind of mentioned this. Don't bury the rhizome in the substrate. It will rot. It will kill your plant. So that's probably the number one tip when it comes to rhizome plants. As we've already mentioned, I have found that it works best. I know Joanna on the Smallscape, my wife, on her channel, she's talked about how to glue these things, how to attach them in a million different ways. It has worked best for us when we glue the rhizome to rocks or wood. Then the roots will take hold, and that just gives a really firm attachment. So keep in mind that for the rhizome-based plants, at least like the Anubias, the Buse, they don't need a ton of light. So it's really easy to give them too much light and to start to burn the plant. The Anubias, make sure you pick the right type, because if you have a smaller tank, There's a nubius in the back. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, on the back, on the left-hand side, that giant blob is an anubias that's a 125, and it has grown just as tall as the 125. And in fact, the leaves are coming out of the top of the tank. I've had a nubius where they grow out the top of a 29 and they push the plastic lid right up and off the tank. So be careful with the nubius. Make sure that you are buying a plant that is going to properly fit the size of the tank that you have. Because once those leaves start to grow out of the water, if they dry out too much, they start to die back. We had that problem in the 50-gallon lowboy. I had a nubius there, and those things were sticking up like a foot above the water line. But if you didn't spray them down, they would dry out and die.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into one of the tips that I have is understand what the plant's going to do and understand the situation when you make your selection, because there's 50 different types of anubias. You have the Fraseri and the Congensis and the Barteri that get really, really big. I used to always assume that anubias meant it was very small, like the Nanas and the Nana Petites and the Coffifolia. No, we have some right now that we sell on our website that when you get them, they're 1.5 feet tall. Yeah. I mean, they're absolutely huge. Not something that you'd want to put in a 5-gallon tank. And crypts are the same way. You know, you've got crypts like Oosteriana. That's how I say it. That's probably wrong. That plant can overtake a tank super fast. But then you've got Crypt Parva that's like a ground cover. It's like a little teeny thing. One of Joanna's favorites, might I add. Stays really, really small, almost like a micro sword. Perfect for a nano tank, but a Crypt Undulata would be way too big for your little nano tank. You might get it and it's only this tall, but it's not going to be that tall for long. Unlike anubias, Crypts grow very fast and they'll surprise you. And when they do, it'll grow right out of the tank, which, you know, trim it back. It's not a big deal, but you want to be careful with that. You can have a tank that is just nothing but solid plants if you let it get out of control. If you use something like anubias, Nana, or Nana Petite, it's going to stay small and it's going to grow very slow. Absolutely perfect for your nano tanks. Substrate is probably the number one topic when it comes to plants. In your opinion, must you use the expensive planted tank substrates, the little dirt balls, or can you get away with sand and gravel?
For beginning plants, I think the substrate is irrelevant. And I know that shocks a lot of people, but we have had, like at one point, again, we had 80 tanks in the fish room. I would say 75% of them were planted. It didn't matter for the crypts, the anubias, the jungle val, the Java fern, it didn't matter. They grew just as well in inert sand as they did in inert gravel. And I'm going to shock a lot of people, and I've said this before on our live streams, other than setting up a tank initially, no root tabs, no liquid fertilizers whatsoever. We let nature do its thing, right? We let the fish produce waste and they would grow like crazy. Now, that isn't to say that you can't get better growth with some of the specialty substrates. One of the best ones I've ever used is fluorite. You want to talk about growing crypts and maximizing their growth. That fluorite, what it does is it doesn't have a lot of nutrients to begin with, but it hangs on to nutrients as they're produced in the tank. And oh my gosh, the crypts in that fluorite tank were the best I've ever had. So you can certainly do that. The fluval stratums and all that kind of stuff, you can use that. Use it as a base layer. I wouldn't just use it exclusively if you're keeping fish, because that becomes really difficult to maintain once you get fish detritus in there, or fish waste and detritus and stuff to try to gravel vac that stuff is really light. It'll suck right up a gravel vac.
Yeah, I am, Lisa and I both, we sell like 8 different fertilizers, but we tell everybody, you know, you use fertilizer when you need to use fertilizer. Yeah. It's like if you're deficient in B12, you either need to take vitamins or go get in the sun. You know, I mean, you respond to the situation. And in a brand new tank, I agree, probably good to use if you're if you're using rhizome plants, you're going to use a liquid fertilizer. If you're planting stems in the substrate or your rosettes, root tabs underneath there is going to be the best thing for it. But eventually, when the fish do their thing, the number one fertilizer for plants is fish poop. So they love to absorb those nitrates. And so the aquarium, simply being an aquarium with fish in it, is going to be great fertilizer for it. I know a lot of people will cringe when they hear us say that, because they're like, no, I want to sell more fertilizer. But it has its place, but it's not 100% necessary for all plants, particularly the ones that we're talking about today. There are some plants, if you put them in the tank and you don't have fertilizer, you don't have CO2, guess what? You got a dead plant. But the ones that we're talking about here today should be able to get by perfectly fine, whether they're planted in gravel, sand, and whether they're fertilized or not, given there's fish in there that are going to fertilize it. And that brings up my next thing, and that is CO2. I've had people say to me to my face, I don't want to keep plants because I don't want to inject CO2. And I completely understand that. And guess what? I said that before too. I don't want to mess with a gas tank in my house. I don't want to deal with the regulators and the bubblers and all that nonsense. Well, guess what? You absolutely don't have to. Just like you said with the fertilizer, CO2 will certainly help, and it'll make the plants grow faster. It'll help to combat algae because the plants will be overwhelming the algae and all of that. CO2 is great, but it's not 100% necessary. Again, unless you're keeping very certain plants that if you're a beginner, you're not going to mess with anyway. And even if you're not a beginner, they're going to be hard plants to find. You got to order them from specialty places and stuff like that. You're going to be fine without CO2. And I got to tell you, if you do need CO2, I could not recommend the new Fluval system more. The bio CO2 that they have. Did you get your hands on that yet, Jason? Have you used it?
No, because I've never used CO2 in my fish room.
Okay.
So I've never found it necessary. Not with the plants that we grow.
Completely understandable, and I feel the same way. But Fluval came out with that system. I'm fortunate you are too. We've had a relationship with Fluval since 2013. They sent it to us and said, hey, we want to know how you feel about this. And I love it because it's easy. It's not going to blow your house up, which, I mean, a CO2 tank isn't going to do that either. But there are the people, a high pressure system, like a CO2 tank that you would get from your welding shop. You can pop hoses and stuff like that. It can be pretty scary. You're not going to have to worry about this with this one. It's a simple mix that you put with water, and it just does its own thing. And of course, because it's made by Fluval, it's a beautiful product. I don't sell this, so I'm not trying to make money off anybody. If you do need to go the CO2 route, I would encourage you to check those system out. They're very, very good. But for the plants that we're going to talk about today, you are completely fine without CO2. Yes, it'll make them grow faster. Some of them will even change colors dependent on whether they have CO2 or not. But it's not going to be a make or break thing for all of these. So,
and really what you're going to be doing with the CO2 for the plants that we're talking about is just giving yourself more work to do, because
that's true.
Now, instead of throwing away a 5-gallon bucket of Jungle Valley, now you're going to be throwing 5-gallon buckets of Jungle Valley. You'll be trimming that every 2 days instead of every couple of weeks. So for the plants that we're talking about, CO2 may just give you more work, cost a little bit more money, a little bit of added complication to your setup. But again, we had 80 tanks running at one point. 75% of them at least were planted and never ran a single CO2. And we only had 2 tanks that had any kind of specialty substrate. One had a fluorite. The other one had Fluval stratum. The rest of the tanks were all just inert gravel, inert sand, pool filter sand, the stuff that you find at Petco and PetSmart, Carib Sea type stuff that was mostly inert.
Yeah, when you watch aquascaping videos, like from our friend George Farmer, who's brilliant, Aqua Pros does a lot of really nice scapes. MD Fish Tanks does them. There's a lot of YouTubers out there that are amazing aquascapers. Almost 100% of the time, you're going to see them using plant substrates. I'm sorry, I have a cat battle happening right here next to me. And they're great for that, particularly in the aquascaping world. And they do benefit a lot of plants. If all you got in the tank is Anubias, ain't going to do much for you. But the planted substrates certainly will help. But they are not a make or break like the CO2. You don't have to do it. I'm sitting here looking at a tank right now that is overwhelmed with plants. We've got Hygrophila in there, 2 different types. There's some Bacopa in there, a bunch of Crypts, and it's all in gravel. So Gravel. It's a mixture of gravel and sand, and it's not very much of it. So, yeah, you don't absolutely have to use those substrates, and they're expensive. So there's that
Yeah.
too. The tank that we have that Lisa has grown all these plants in is kind of a mixture of a bunch of different leftover gravels and sands and stuff like that we had, and the plants are doing extremely well. Light. Where are you on lights? Because there are people that'll tell you your plants are never going to grow unless you use the $300 Fluval 3.0. What do you feel? What are your thoughts on plant lights?
So for the plants that we're talking about here, if you have illumination over your tank, they're most likely going to grow just fine. When we had both sides of the fish room running, we had all those tanks. They range from anywhere from the cheapest of the cheap beams work, the low end Haiger that weren't even the planted. I say low end, but I meant low cost Haiger lights that weren't the planted lights, the Phoenix Stingray 1s, the 2s. And then we had, the really expensive Kestel lights. We've got these AI aqua illumination blades and the primes, which are about as high end as you can get in the freshwater land. When it comes to lights, you're choosing a light that's really just going to be nice to look at in your tank. But unless you've got a really deep tank, or you're growing highlight plants, for the plants that we're talking about, it's choose the light that fits your budget. Choose the light that gives you the light spectrum that you enjoy. I always like lights, and we've talked about this in the light podcast that we did. I want a light where I can adjust the intensity and ideally adjust the light spectrum to dial in a light that a color spectrum that I enjoy looking at. The plants that we're talking about, they're not overly complicated. The only thing that you really have to worry about with the plants that we're talking about, like I mentioned before, is the Anubias. You don't want those lights to be too bright. You're just going to wind up with a ton of algae in your tank. The Anubias, especially as they grow closer to the surface, if they do, they might actually struggle if they've got too much light.
Yep. These are all facts. This is why I like having you as my co-host. The lights are just like everything else that we've talked about. You have a more intense light, it will help them out. It could help them to a fault, like you said with the Anubias. I mean, it could cause more problems for you. But the beautiful thing about this world of aquarium plants is any retailer. I mean, I know I do it. Aquarium Co-op does it. Flip Aquatics does it. Dustin does it. When you go on these websites to look at plants, they're going to tell you in the description of that plant, low to moderate light, or low light in the case of Anubias, requires high lighting. And so if you're somebody that you have that inexpensive light that's maybe not the brightest thing in the world, it's not meant for plants, it doesn't mean you can't keep plants. It means you're going to want to stay away from the ones that say that it requires intense lighting. Stay away from those. You're not ready for those. Your tank isn't ready for those. Stick with the ones that say low light or low to moderate light, which pretty much everything we're going to talk about today is fine in, medium to low light. They're going to be fine. Particularly, I think the Anubias would be the kind of cream of the crop when it comes to performance in low light. But all of these will do fine with lower light. More light will certainly make it better. But I don't want you to, as the viewer or listener of this podcast, I don't want you to take yourself out of this game because you don't think your light's powerful enough. There is a light that'll work for you. You just have, or not there's a plant that will work for your light is what I meant to say. So you don't have to bail out on the whole thing because you don't think your light is up to par. So that's enough fun for one day. Let's get into our list. I have a list. I don't know if you have any off the top of your head. I got 7 that I would recommend to anybody.
Yeah, I've got a few that come to mind in terms of my favorites.
You want me to start it, or you want to start it? Age before beauty? How about that?
Sure. So does that mean I have to go?
You go first. Yep.
Okay. One of my favorites, it's a particular type of crypt. It's called Crypt spiralum, and it's in my 125 on this side over here. So it is a crypt. It is a root feeding plant. It is something that you plant in the substrate. If you are familiar with jungle val at all, it's the jungle val is kind of a long, skinny plant, and it sends out runners. Well, this Crypt spiralis is somewhat kind of similar to that, except it kind of has like a curly Q sort of leaf to it. They get pretty tall, and it's a plant that is mostly easy to grow. It is a crypt. It is going to send out runners, and it's got those long, skinny, kind of curly Q leaves that adds a lot of visual interest to the tank. Absolutely love that plant. It's probably not as easy to find as many of the other types of crypts. Might be a little bit more money, but I would still, at least in terms of how easy it is to keep, I would still consider it to be a relatively easy plant. And it's definitely up there in my top 5 favorite plants of all time.
Did I just hire you as a representative for keepfishkeeping.com? Because listen, Spiralis might be hard to find, but guess what? I think we've got like 60 of them.
Nice.
So I know a place you can get them. And they are very cool. I agree. The funny thing is, when you look at crypts, you see a bunch of different crypts. You see the Tropica and the Wenti and all these undulata. And then you see the Spiralis. You're like, wait a minute, that's not a crypt. That doesn't make sense. But it definitely is. I love the choice. I think it's a great one. They're very, very cool. I love the little curly Qs. There's another plant that is not going to be on our list, which would be the Vesuvius sword, another rosette. It does that. It's got the curly Qs. We've struggled with that one a little bit, though, so I don't know how much longer we're going to carry it. But the Spiralis, home run. Agree with you 100%. I'm going to start off with a plant that I believe, I know I said something about Rotala earlier. I think this is the easiest plant that's ever been in the hobby. Well, I can't say that. There's another one. This one is as foolproof and easy because literally you just drop it in the tank and you let it do its thing. I'm talking about Tiger Lotus, more particularly red Tiger Lotus, because that's what we carry. But Tiger Lotus in general, it's a bulb. It's a ball that just looks like a little dingleberry, and you just drop it in and you're like, this isn't that big of a deal. But before you know it, that thing is going to explode, and it's almost like magic. Sends up these really long stems with what looks like a lily pad on the top. Absolutely fascinating. And they grow super fast. We have them in just bulb form, and then we have them where they've already sprouted. We don't sell them just as bulbs. We're not going to send you a little black ball. I mean, we won't send it out unless it has leaves coming out of it. The leaves are big. This is an easy plant, and you don't have to worry about anything. You just drop it in there and it's done. It's great. It's kind of like the banana plant, and you just drop it in there and it does its thing. Absolutely foolproof. And let me tell you something, we can't have enough of them. They sell so fast. It's because they're beautiful. They're easy. You can't go wrong. So yep. Tiger Lotus. Love it. Particularly the red ones. What do you got next?
I don't know the species name. Maybe you do, but the red crypt. We have them throughout our tanks in the gallery. Do you know the actual name of the plant?
The probably Crypt Mioia, which would be the Wenti. Some people say Wenditi.
Red, right? Yeah.
Red Mioia. Yep.
Yeah. That is a great plant. It's a medium-sized plant, but it's one of those things where you could do an entire crypt tank with between Spiralis and all the different varieties, get different sizes, the parva, and have crypts that are growing anywhere from 24 inches tall to maybe taller to the parva, which is small. And you get the red and the green. I will say that the red, to get that, yeah, the light might need to be more on that medium side, a little bit higher. Nutrients have to be sufficient. You could make an argument that you're going to get more red, certainly a strong argument. The more CO2 you have in the tank, the redder it's going to be. But the nice thing about this plant is you're still going to see that red, at least we do, and we don't run CO2, but our lights do. They are capable of providing some decent light, but that is absolutely just a phenomenal plant. It is a root feeder. It's going to send out runners. It will spread throughout the tank and send up little baby crypts all around the perimeter of where the adult plant is growing. It's a bushy plant like a lot of the crypts are, so you'll find some of your more reclusive fish, especially like your dwarf emerald rasboras or maybe your pencil fish. We used to find them just kind of swimming in and out of those plants. It looked really cool.
Yeah, and what I've found is if you have that CO2, you'll get, It's not like a fire engine red, but it is a bright red color on those. If you don't have CO2, it's still red, but it's more of like a flame red or maybe a burgundy. Still
Yeah.
absolutely gorgeous. And it stands out next to the super bright green plants. So, yeah, it's a huge contrast and it is beautiful. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I'm going to do it anyway. There's another one, Crypt Wente variety that is called the Crypt Tropica. It's very easy to confuse that with the brand Tropica, but it's not. It's actually it's the Crypt Wente bronze, or the common name would be Tropica. And this is the same thing. It looks just like the Mioya, but it's a bronze color. I don't want to call it brown, but it's a really cool contrast, that with the red, and then with the next one that was going to be on my list, which is again the same variety, but it's the Crypt Wente green, which is a bright, bright green. You put those three next to each other, forget about it. You're done. I mean, you got all three of those colors. They're going to mix really well. It's basically the same plant, but the colors are very different on it. All three of them absolutely gorgeous. All three of them easy to keep. They will just explode. They're not going to get so huge that you have to, they're growing out of your tank or anything like that, but make a huge statement. So yeah, we're going to combine those. You said the red, I say the bronze and the green. You got yourself a winner right there.
Oh yeah, for sure. My next one, Jungle Val. Jungle Val or Italian Val, very similar. The Italian Val has more of like a spotty kind of texture to it. Jungle Val, Italian Val is a great plant. Pro tip secret here, if you're having problems growing Val, float it first. Let the Val spread out along the surface. Let it send out runners and then plant the runners. Don't bury the Jungle Val deep into the substrate. It will tend to rot on you. So if you just bury the runners and keep it secure enough so that's buried, maybe just a little bit of the roots where the Val is kind of sprouting, that's probably the best way to do it. But that plant, beware. If you've got good conditions for Jungle Val, you real fast could have an entire tank filled with nothing but Val, front to back, side to side, all the way from the bottom to the top. It is a tall plant. We've had Jungle Val easily grow the height of a 125-gallon tank, and actually have the leaves just kind of curling over.
Yep.
So you're looking at a plant that realistically could approach 28 to 30 inches when it's full grown, as long as it's getting really good conditions, and grows really fast. I mean, that was a plant, like I said, at one time, and I really regret this, when we had, before the gallery, we had this side of the fish, and there was valve throughout this entire site. We were pulling it out, chucking it in 5-gallon buckets right in the garbage. We couldn't sell it. It was just growing so fast. And guess what? We take down all these tanks, put these gallery tanks in that are behind me if you're watching on YouTube, and all of a sudden I wanted some Val, and I look over on the other side of the fish room. I'm like, oh crap, I think we threw it all away. So we have one tank, we have a shrimp tank that's got some Val in it, but it's basically, at this point, it might be the only tank that we have in our fish room that's growing Val. But it's a great plant, easy to grow, doesn't require any additional nutrients, that doesn't require low to medium light. It works out really well.
Very nice. There is a picture. Dustin Wunderlich, who is the owner of Dustin's Fish Tanks, has a picture. It might even be on his website, of him holding some Jungle Val upside down. And Dustin's a tall guy. He's like 6'2". He's holding it like this, and it's touching the ground. So, it'll grow out of control really fast and make a huge statement. And I love when it grows up and then it bends over and just keeps going. Yeah. That's really, really cool. Hurts your lighting. You got to move it out of the way sometimes, but no, that's a cool one. My next one is one that I mean, this is, again, it's a gift to fish keepers. Wisteria. Wisteria and Water Sprite look very similar to each other. Wisteria is a little fatter, I think. It's just another foolproof grower. You just put it in there, you let it do its thing. It's going to get big, so you want to keep it in the back. It's going to get big, and it's going to get big fast. And it's not going to make your living room look like Jumanji, but it's going to grow out of control really fast. Trim it down. It's fun to trim. It's easy to trim. Not a big deal. I In our situation here in North Carolina, Wisteria has worked for us way better than Water Sprite. And this is why you see Wisteria in stock all the time on our website, and the Water Sprite not as much. We haven't found the perfect supplier for it yet that agrees with our situation here, meaning our water. But the Wisteria, it just explodes. I mean, it's, and you want to talk about making a big statement. It'll make a big statement. It'll make it fast. This is a cheap plant. You get a super nice big one for $8-9, and it'll have a huge impact. The Wisteria that we get, it's kind of weird. I've gotten it from a few different places. Wisteria in immersed form, it's a completely different plant than what you see when you buried it in the water. We used to carry one that they would basically clip it from their immersed setup and send that to us. And then we would ship it to customers and they would be like, wait a second, this isn't what I ordered. And we'd have to tell them, don't worry about it, plant it. They convert super fast, put them in the water, and it's just going to explode. We switched suppliers, not because that one was bad. The plants were great, but I didn't want to have to keep explaining that to customers. So we have another supplier now that is just big and bold, and people are surprised when they open it up and they're like, holy cow, like, I can't believe that. So, it's just a matter of getting them from the right supplier. But yeah, huge statement, very fast. And, but you're not going to want to put Wisteria in a like super manicured aquascape fancy kind of a thing, because it'll overtake all that really fast.
Yeah. I actually did a video I showed side by side Wisteria versus Water Sprite, went into the details of the two, but they have very similar appearance. Water Sprite, like you said, it's a little bit skinnier. I have found with both of those, it's easier just to float that plant, and the plant almost grows in reverse. As it gets larger, it grows from the top of the tank towards the bottom. The roots are really, in my opinion, just there mostly to hold the plant in place, almost like an Anubias, but they set out little skinny roots. And eventually those roots will find an attachment point, whether it's some type of hardscape, wood, maybe the substrate. But when we were growing it, that was another one. I was throwing that plant out by the bucketfuls, and then it was gone. Like, that plant will grow really fast. It dies really fast. So as soon as there's a problem in the tank, like it runs out of nutrients, that's one. Or if you want to maintain it, liquid fertilizer is most likely something that you're going to have to include. Otherwise, it will suck the nutrients right out and boom. And then 2 months later, like, what happened to my plant? It's all dead. So that one, float it, let it grow down. It will eventually find attachment points, but it was so awesome because in the video I showed, early fish room videos too, it would grow throughout the tank and just make this total jungle appearance. Like you're in the middle of the Amazon jungle and all these little fish are swimming around. Awesome plant, super easy. Absolutely correct. My next one is probably Anubias Nana Petite. I love that plant. If you were to look throughout our gallery and on the other side in the fish room, Joanna used to love just gluing this to random parts of an aquascape and just kind of tuck it in. It's just one of these things that gives you some greenery at a higher eye level without overwhelming an aquarium. It grows slow. It's a small plant. So if you want to glue it to rocks and wood, put it in little crevasses in your aquarium where the hardscape kind of soften it up a little bit. It's an amazing plant for that. It's going to be a water column feeder with a small rhizome. Really hardy plant. Again, low light, slow growth. To me, it's especially for a beginner, that can be a perfect plant. It's not going to overwhelm your aquarium. You don't need a bunch of stuff to maintain it. It's just going to kind of do its thing.
That's a plant that I cannot buy enough of because it is by far one of our best sellers. And understand, folks, this list is not based on sales. It's not at all. But the reason why that plant is one of our best sellers is because it is a foolproof plant. It's adorable. It's little. It's a slow grower. It's not going to grow out of control. And it makes a huge statement. When you put it in that little crevasse or you put it in between a couple of rocks, or which that's the same thing, or, it makes a big statement. And so on that note, I will take it a step further. This is not next on my list, but I'll make it next on my list. Another variety of Anubias, which would be the Nana. It's Anubias barterite Nana, which is basically exactly what Jason said, just a little bit bigger. Well, substantially bigger, but not humongous, fill up your entire tank bigger.
Right.
Still easy to control and easy to keep in place, slow grower. Same, everything that Jason just said applies to this plant. Same exact thing. Don't plant it, attach it somewhere, feed it through the water. You'll be good to go. And that is probably our second best selling Anubias. This is not what makes it my favorite. It's just the reason why it sells so much is because it's so easy to keep and it's gorgeous.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, the easiest plant on the face of this earth, hornwort. Hornwort is you don't plant this stuff, in my opinion, just float it. It's a weed. Okay. So, straight up, if you're new to plants, hornwort is this abomination that if you put in a tank, it will grow faster than any plant I have ever seen in my life. And just like, boom, it's actually really good. I have used hornwort to fight algae because it will suck nutrients out of the water and it will stop, especially if you've got blackbeard algae. I had a tank that was covered in green hair algae and I put it in. It was no, it actually was blackbeard. I'm sorry. I had Julidochromis ornatus, it's a Lake Tanganyika and rock dwelling cichlid, and there was blackbeard algae in that tank. I threw some hornwort in there, and within 4 weeks, the blackbeard algae was gone. Gone. There's nothing in there that ate that. I mean, it was just the cichlids and maybe a couple bristlenose plecos, which don't eat that stuff.
Right.
But the hornwort outcompeted the blackbeard algae, grew super fast. The downside to that plant, just like the wisteria, even more so. When that plant grows and then it runs out of nutrients, it dies fast. And when it dies, it leaves these little tiny needles that are inevitably going to clog up intakes for canister filters, hang on backs. It's going to make a tremendous mess all over your substrate. So you really want to have a situation where you've got a constant supply of nutrients. Either maybe it's a heavily stocked tank or you're feeding it some liquid fertilizer, but don't be too crazy with it because then what you wind up with is hornwort mixed in with green hair algae, which becomes a real pain in the you know what. So, but if you want something super cheap, we still have some. I actually like it because when we're bagging up shrimp for swaps, I can pull off a little stem, stick it in the bag, give the shrimp something to hold on to. If you've got algae issues and you want to control nitrate, put some hornwort in a tank. It'll grow really fast. I would probably pull some of it out just so that it continues to grow and it's not getting overwhelmed with a big old blotch of it, because that's another one. It will fill up an entire tank, like from top to bottom, side to side, where the fish can't even swim. And we would pull that stuff out by every single week, 5-gallon buckets of it out of our tanks and just toss it in the garbage. But if you had CO2, I can't even imagine what that plant would do. You'd be pulling it out every single day, probably. It'd be crazy.
Yeah, I got a funny story, a funny hornwort story. If you go on our website, you probably see it listed on there, but we don't currently have any. And it's because it became a problem. Because it grows so fast and you can lose control of it so fast. We lost a tank of it. And when I say we lost the tank, it got so far out of control, and we weren't able to keep up with it because it was growing so fast. And so it started to stink. I mean, it was a problem. And so I'm like, you know what? I don't have time to fool with all this now. I pulled it all out, threw it into a tote, just a plastic, whatever tote. And we actually stuck it outside, right outside the door of the barn. And when we drained the other tank completely, because like you said, the little needles, you're not going to, it was a huge mess. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to figure out a better way to keep this hornwort in our facility, but we're not going to keep it that way. Meanwhile, we had a bunch of rainstorms and we had all kinds of stuff. And that tote, I'm embarrassed to say, it's still sitting right outside of our barn, but it's sitting in the direct sunlight. And let me tell you what happened. It's overflowing with hornwort. And because the water we've had so much rain over the last month, the tote has overflowed. We have hornwort growing in the grass around that tote. I came out one day and I said, Lisa, we got a field of hornwort here. And it's all right there. I mean, hornwort, yeah, it's indestructible. You can lose control of it really fast. My problem was I didn't know what the best way was to sell it, because we could literally send you a little sprig like this, and before you know it, it's grown completely out of control. So yeah, I completely agree. Definitely easy, Maybe even a little too easy.
Too easy, right?
It's
The other
so
thing
easy
too
you can
is,
grow it in the grass.
yeah, with that kind of a plant that floats like that, you can't have high flow. So
Right.
hornwort will die if you've got too much flow. Same thing with like guppy grass. I would consider guppy grass and hornwort basically the same thing. Only
Very
guppy grass
similar.
causes even way more of a mess than hornwort does. But if you've got a lot of flow in your aquarium, it's going to die. It's going to shed all those leaves everywhere. So I wouldn't even bother. But if you've got like sponge filters, slow flow, bettas, where you've got like a relaxed tank, that would be it works better there.
Yep, absolutely. My next one is one of my favorites. I love it because it's like your Cryptmeoia. It's got a little different color to it. It has a whole lot more red in it, and that would be the Ludwigia repens. Some people pronounce it repens. I say repens because I think it sounds better. Repens just
Sure.
sounds weird. This is a stem plant that the beautiful thing about it is a fast grower. It's got the red in it. When you receive it, if it's young, it might be green. It completely depends on the way it was grown. But when you get it planted in your tank and it establishes itself, it will develop a lot of red into it. It's not a bright red. It's a burgundy kind of red. The nice thing about this is the first one we've talked about so far. If it grows up to the top of the tank, you can clip it halfway down, take that clipping, bury that in the substrate, and next thing you know, you've got a free plant. I don't care who you are. A free plant is a beautiful thing. You wouldn't think it would do it, but even that freshly cut little clipping, you put it down in there, new roots will form and it'll embed itself and grow. And you'll find yourself doing that over and over and over again until the next thing you know, you've got a tank full of Ludwigia. It's a beautiful thing. My only thing with all stem plants is if they do get too far out of control, whether another one that's on my list is Bacopa. I'll just include it in this same conversation. The bottom of the stems might not be receiving hardly any light. And so what you end up with is a bunch of kind of ugly plants because the top 6 inches has beautiful leaves on it and the bottom is just a bare, almost looks like a palm tree. You don't want that. So you keep them trimmed down to where the whole plant is getting light to it. Doesn't have to be the most intense light, but it's all getting light to it. And it's all going to have those leaves. And you just get an unlimited supply of free plants. And with so many of the plants being green or dark green or light green, it's really cool to have one that is, got that variant of red in it that looks really nice. Ludwigia repens, beautiful, and another one of our best sellers. So, that tells you it's not because I'm a good salesman, because I don't even talk about these plants hardly ever. It's just that it's so popular because it's beautiful and it's easy to keep.
My next one is unusual, but it's an easy plant, and that is Subwassertane. Uh, Subwassertane, for those of you who don't know what it has similar properties, I guess, as like a Java moss would, where you're gonna basically attach it to wooden rocks. There's no stems, there's nothing. It just attaches to hardscape. But this plant is really crazy. We had it in an 8-gallon, and we were breeding the Florida least killifish in this tank. We had a mono shrimp, and it almost takes on the appearance of, imagine if you had a saltwater algae, like a really pretty one, but it's fresh water. And so it stays relatively short. It's kind of like it's a real bushy growth, and it's really soft. So it's a very, very soft plant. If you were to touch it and like pick it up and like right now, for those of you watching on YouTube, Joanna took the Subwassertane out of that 8-gallon because it was growing pretty extensively and put some of it in the 50-gallon lowboy, and she connected it to the Seiryu stone, and it's a very soft, very bushy sort of growth. But fish, especially small fish, especially shrimp, love to be inside of there. The fry, for those of you who are breeding shrimp or breeding like live bears, if you can get some of that Subwassertane, the small fry, they love going in and out and swimming in and out of those plants. And it will get, like I said, really bushy, almost to the point where it looks like salt water, where you see the fish swimming in and out of it. It's awesome. It's very, very easy to grow. Lowish light. You can't have a lot of flow because that stuff will start to break off and it would start going everywhere. But if you've got a lower flow tank, it's awesome.
I've got another one that does not want high flow. It does like light, but it's easy to get light to this plant. and it's going to be two. I'm going to talk about two of them. Red root floaters and Sylvania. These are two floating plants that you quite literally want zero flow because they're floating. The red root floaters I prefer. I love it. I love the Sylvania too. Sylvania almost looks like tiny floating banana plants. It's really cool, but the red root floaters are amazing because they're like little lily pads that are floating, and they have roots. And take a wild guess what color those roots are. I'll give you one guess. They're bright red, and the bright red is when you know they're receiving the right amount of nutrients. If they're not, they're just they look like roots, like that tan color or brown. But if your tank is balanced and it's got the proper amount of nutrients in there, they'll be blood red, and it's really, really cool to see them floating, and they've just got these long roots that come down that are bright red. Really super cool. And you quite literally just put it in the tank and leave it alone. You don't have to do anything to it. It will reproduce super fast, and before you know it, I don't think it's as bad as duckweed, but it grows almost like duckweed.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing, and it's beautiful, and you can get a little bit of it, which when we sell a whole cup full of it. I think we probably give people too many, but it'll spread out. It'll spread out fast. All those roots will be hanging down. Your little fish will love swimming through those roots. Absolutely perfect. I love those. I've only got one more.
Well, I want to do a couple honorable mentions. So I'm going to just kind of combine them together. And that is the crinums. Now it's a little bit more of the Crinum calamostratum is my all-time favorite plant. So
I love that one.
But I don't necessarily consider it super easy, but look it up. Crinum calamostratum is almost like it's a plant. If you're watching on YouTube, it's kind of shaped like, I don't even know, again, some saltwater thing where it just sends up. It's like a reverse weeping willow sort of thing, but with these skinny little leaves that have like ruffles to them. Crazy plant. And the other one is still a crinum, and it's in the 125. Oops, behind my head. It's in this 125 right here. It's a bulb plant. I don't remember. I'm sorry. It's a crinum, but I don't remember the species. But it's a bulb plant. It's one of the tallest freshwater plants I think you can get, because when we took it was in a 40 breeder. We took it out of there, and we were gonna put it in this 125. And just like you said with Dustin, Joanna, I have it on video when we set up this 125 Geophagus tank. Joanna held it up. Now, Joanna's 5'10". She held it up with her arm way above her head, and the crinum was on the floor and was still running about a foot or two on an angle. When we put it in the tank, it's a 6-foot tank. It was all the way to the other side. So this thing grows really, really, really long. So for those of you who are like, I've got a 4'150", that's 30 inches tall, not a problem. This crinum, it's a bulb crinum. Super easy plant. The thing has been around and growing forever in both the 40, then we replanted it in this 125. But it's definitely one of those plants where you are going to have to trim it back, because even here with the canister filter, it will kind of not impede the flow, but it just doesn't give us the surface agitation we want. So we trim it when it gets to be about 3 feet long. But if we didn't, it would grow all the way to the other side of that 6-foot tank. Thicker leaves, kind of like imagine jungle val, but it's a thicker leaved plant. But super crazy. So the crinums are awesome.
All right. So I've already talked about it. My last entry in this video is the one plant that I almost guarantee anyone that puts this plant in their tank, although you could say the same thing about wisteria and hornwort, there's a lot of them that you're guaranteed are going to be fine. This one is another one that is guaranteed. Everybody knows what I'm about to say. It is Rotala, particularly Rotala rotundifolia. Some places would have it labeled as Rotala indica, which is, I believe that's how you say it. Pretty much the same thing. This is the perfect aquarium plant, because if you let it grow to 2 feet and then you cut it down to 6 inches, the 6 inches that's left still looks exactly the same as it's just consistent. It's gorgeous. It grows like crazy. There's a great video. Do you remember Jacob's Aquariums? He
Oh my
hasn't.
gosh, that's a way back
Yeah,
YouTube channel.
he is one of the OGs, and I believe the very first fish keeping YouTube channel to live stream. And I was fortunate to be a guest on Jacob's live
Wow.
stream. Yeah, we're going way back to talk about Jacob. He did a video where he built a wall of Rotala in one of his tanks. And it was basically what I was talking about with the Ludwigia and the Bacopa. It was letting it grow, cutting it back, planting the clippings, letting it grow, and just doing that over and over and over again. And he got to a point where he had a tank that was just a solid wall of Rotala. It was really, really cool looking. This has been my favorite plant ever since I started planting plants in aquariums, because it's beautiful. It is huge, not huge in that the leaves are this big. It's actually a very thin leaf, a very kind of loose stem, very small stem, but they grow very tall. Again, most of the Rotala that you're going to get is grown immersed, and so it looks very different than what it's going to look like when it fully is submerged and flourishes. But even in its immersed form, it's a beautiful plant. It's going to take a little bit for it to convert and transform, but the beautiful thing is it's not going to melt back all the way down like crypts will sometimes. Not always. Don't be scared of them. I've never had a crypt melt. I don't know about you, but whether it's immersed or submerged, I've never had a crypt melt. I don't know what the big fuss is about crypts melting. I'm not trying to be a salesman. I'm just telling you, we've planted hundreds of crypts and I've never had them melt. The Rotala is not going to do that at all. But it is going to change, and you're going to get those fine needle type leaves instead of more round leaves like you're going to get when it's immersed. But it is huge impact, fast grower. It will grow all the way to the top of the tank and just keep on going out of the tank and keep on growing. A lot of stem plants will do that, or you can train it to kind of bend over like jungle val and grow on the top of the tank. It is my favorite, and I got to tell you a little thing about Rotala that made me so happy on this podcast. Back last year, Daytona, before you got involved in the podcast with me, I interviewed our friend Jeff Miyake, one of the most talented aquascapers on earth, my personal favorite aquascaper. I interviewed him on this podcast, and I asked him what his favorite plant was, and he gave me the best answer ever. It was one word: Rotala. So to hear that from the king of all aquascaping, has won national awards and stuff for aquascaping, for that to be his favorite plant kind of made me feel good, because it's my favorite plant too. Love it. Cannot keep it enough in the warehouse. I mean, it goes super fast. No matter how many I order, that's how many get sold. It's crazy. But that's not why it's my favorite. It was my favorite before I was even selling plants. Love Rotala, particularly the rotundifolia. You cannot go wrong with this plant. Easy. Plant it in the substrate. Watch it do its thing. If you want it to be even more out of control, give it some root tabs, particularly if your tank is brand new. This tank, you're going to lose, or this plant, you're going to almost watch it grow. I mean, it's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But that's the last one I've got for you, the grand finale.
It's a cool plant. Yep. Well, I think we have given people a lot of options, but we would also still love to hear from you in the comments. What plants do you love? We've left out a lot, the mosses, the swords, all that kind of stuff. But we'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite plant? What's the go-to for you? If you could only keep one, what would it be?
Yep, that's a good one. And you know what? People will have plenty of opinions too, because there's so many out there. There's going to be probably 40 or 50 plants in the comment section that we didn't even mention in this video. So listen, that's important. If you're watching this, even if you don't want to leave a comment, that's fine. You'll probably benefit by reading the comments, because you're going to see a lot of really good suggestions down there that we didn't even talk about, because the episode's only an hour long. So that was it. That was fun. And again, you know, we do have these plants available at cutefishkeeping.com. Everything that we talked about today, except for Jason's last one, which remind me of the name of that
Aquariums?
one? No, we have
Or
the
was it
crinum. We have the crinum calamastratum, but we don't have the other one you talked about.
The bulb crinum. I don't even remember what that thing is called, the species.
But after that, you mentioned another one that Joanna put in the tank behind you.
No, that was the crinum. That was the bulb crinum. But I don't know
No,
the
there
species
was
on it.
another
It's like
one.
a 6-foot long plant. So it's really not something for most people anyway.
There was another one. It started with an S that you mentioned. That maybe I'm just living in a fantasy land. I swear you mentioned
are.
another one that it doesn't matter. Rewind it and you can see what Jason suggested there. It started with an S. I don't remember. It was actually the
A
only
water
plant.
tang?
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that was before the crinums. Yeah, that's a cool one. Yeah.
That was the only plant that we've talked about today that, I'll be honest, I've never even heard of. So I'm anxious to see what that looks like. So, but that's the beauty of this. We start a conversation and then you continue it down below. But all of these plants, except for that one and the hornwort, unless you want it out of my yard, they're not available. They're all available on keepfishkeeping.com. But I encourage you, go to your local fish store, get them first. If they don't have them, then you can come to us. We'd be happy to ship them to you. But with all that said, this has been a blast. Another successful episode of the most, what do you call it? I don't know. The best aquarium podcast on the planet. We've done 4 of these today, and I'm all out of things to say. So it's, stuck up here, but this has been a lot of fun. We really do appreciate you all hanging out with us here today. It's been great. Thank you for the support, and we look forward to seeing you again next week when hopefully I have my new internet. We'll see.